boom, bungity bung, all the town is there. Every chinko just as zippy as a coon from Mississippi. Oh, ring them bells, don't you hear them chiming? Lovey-dovey rhyming. Jingle, jangling, tango, tangling, 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 boom, boom, bingity bing in the morning sun.
Cabin Fever 2018 is finally here. We're at the American Legion in Baldwinville. They've kindly hosted this show for us. This is our third year here at the Baldwinville Legion. Our first year was at Camelot, and we quickly outgrew that. And as you can see behind me, we definitely needed more room, and we have it here. I'm wondering what's going to happen next year, if we're going to have enough room, but we'll make do, I'm sure. So it's very well received. We have 21 collectors that showed up today, and some of them brought 2 collections. So in all, we have 25 collections in our show this year. So we're glad to see it growing, and we're glad to see the enthusiasm of all of our collectors and our visitors to get excited about this show and to make it grow for us.
This is Poland water bottles. They go back to 1876.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know they did that.
Yeah, they're called Moses bottles. I don't know when that name come into being, but they were owned by the Riker family, and the owner of Riker's also had a long beard, so the bottles could have been formed after him or Moses, I guess, you know. But that's it. Yep.
This is how they sold water?
Back in the day, they made these special bottles for the opening of their 350-room hotel up there in Poland, Maine. Yeah, and that's some of them. These are 1935. These are in the 20s. You know, then they started making alcohol with them. You know, back in the 40s. And
That's an idea.
yeah. So they made, then they went to ginger ale and things like that, you know, soda water.
How did you start collecting?
Well, I'm from Maine originally, and I was up in Maine on vacation, and this shop here, the Palabra shop in Booth Bay Harbor, the woman had the largest collection of these bottles of anybody. When they went out of business, she bought everything they had. And I bought a bottle from her, and, you know, 47 years ago, and still haven't got them all, and probably never will have, but I'm working on it, you know.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing your collection.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it.
So what we have here today are antique, made in America, pressed metal Tonka Toys. These are from both circa 1950, 1960. And what we have, even though I have a few more in order that unfortunately did not make it in for the show, these show the progression throughout the years. From 1947 through 1954, Tonka Toys, made in Mound, Minnesota, did not have headlights. The headlights were actually part of the metal body, and they were painted over along with the cab. Once you reached 1955, which is 1 year before what you see here in front of you, the headlights were actually made of metal, and they were one piece with the grille. That edition ran very short, and henceforth you come to 1956 and 1957. In 1956, they came out with the stake body farm truck. This originally would have had a fence and a ramp and farm animals that came with it in the package. This has the original sliding door, along with the original rope that came with it in 1956. As you can see, it's 99% rust-free. The item has the original mud flaps. As you can see here on the bottom, you have the original mud flaps. There's no dings or dents. And what really is the most important to collectors is to not only be rust-free, but to have something without any dings in it, scratches, and to also have the decals, to have the full decal attached to the item. If you have the decals, that also brings up the collector desirability on the items. Where'd you find that? Believe it or not, eBay, the market is actually very strongly driven on eBay. You can find them in grades from completely rusted out to almost nearly flawless. And it's basically, it's all the collectors sell. As the baby boomers have retired here in America, not only have the baby boomers driven up the price of all the original cars, whether it's 57 Chevys or 67 Mustangs, not only have the baby boomers driven up the price of the automobiles, but the baby boomers have also driven up the toy market for original collect metal toys in good condition or higher. Henceforth, the market drives the price. The baby boomers not only want the real ones, they're also buying a lot of the original ones that they grew up with that we all did as children. So as you progress through the years, following next you have a 1957 hydraulic, which was actually a spring-loaded mechanism. And in 1957, you had it here where you would click the bed. I'll get it for you in a second. You lock the tailgate and there you go. So this is actually fully functional. So you would release the tailgate so the tailgate works, and it actually has a spring-loaded mechanism where you could actually have a load of sand in it when they were children and dump the load of sand out. So what I do is when I have this particular one, I make sure that I leave the bed up to keep the tension off the spring. So in 1947 again, you had no headlights. The headlights, as Tonka began first as Mound Metal Products out of Mound, Minnesota, and you went from Mound Metal Products to Tonka. So from 47 to 54, no headlights. 55, the headlights were metal with the grill. 56 and 57, you then had for the first time plastic headlights inside of a metal casing. And then as you progressed, in 1958, they actually started with 2 headlights in 1958 on each side. Now, this here being a tow truck, this is a 1962, and with a 1962, now you have full plastic headlights. You've clearly lost the metal casing as companies have to grow and businesses have to save money on their expenditures. So as you progressed, this is the first year in the 1958 and up that you could actually get a plastic windshield. So roughly circa 1958 was the first time that Tonkas came with a plastic part. Henceforth, it was the windshield, as you see here in this 1962 model. Progressing through the years, you then go to a 1963, shortly after, again plastic windshield, 2 headlights. Now, what also makes them desirable is, do you have the original hoses? Do you have the original parts? Again, the original labels on them that have not been peeled off, as oftentimes we know child would often tear them off just playing with them or scuff them. Once again, if you can get down to minimal rust, most of the original paint, no big dings or dents. You'll see there is some paint missing here a little bit. This is typical for these vehicles. This would be very fine to maybe a sub-excellent condition on this one right here. Whereas if you go back to something when you get older where you have more of the original paint, these would be excellent condition to where these would probably be very fine condition. So the collectors, when you go to purchase these, they do charge accordingly depending on the value of the vehicle, dents, scratches, rust, labels, are there parts missing? Over the years, these dumbbells, as they're called, would be missing on the end if a child dropped them, so you would be missing the dumbbells. And all of these things add up in what make the American-made pressed metal steel products more valuable. If they were pressed metal steel and they're very, shall we say, rustless or rust-free for the most part, the collectors, especially the baby boomers, are driving the market just as they are with the real automobiles because they want what they grew up with. It catches their eye and they go, hey, I had that. That's something I'd like to have.
What's your favorite one?
My favorite one by far would be the farm stake bed truck, would definitely be, because to find the original paint with no dents in this condition is extremely difficult. So this would be my favorite one by far. But if I was to tell you I'm not looking to buy more, I would be lying. 1,600 yards. And you can find these commonly on the collector market, but at 14,600 oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know I was recording. At 14,600 yards, these would be fired by either the United States Navy or the United States Coast Guard. When one of these was used, it was either commonly used in either training exercises or for live round usage, but this is circa 1944 United States Navy. You can collect these for roughly $65 to $85 a piece, depending on the market where you go to. They're quite common due to the amount that were used during World War II, but very popular among collectors.
houses. They're actually ornaments, Hallmark Christmas ornaments. And the earliest one is from 1983. I also collect dollhouses, so I was attracted to this one because it looks like a little dollhouse. But then they've actually come out with a house every year, not just houses, they have stores. So they have a pet store and a flower store and a candy shop. There's a Hallmark store. And they try and make all the interiors, they all pretty much all have a Christmas tree inside them. And like the school has little desks and the teacher's desk, and the bank has a vault. And I just, yeah. And so occasionally when there's like an anniversary year for Hallmark, they'll come out with something bigger, like the big department store. That, yeah. So it had the grand staircases and things like that, you know.
What happened to a Templeton Inn?
Yeah. Yeah, there actually is a Victorian, there's a bed and breakfast, there's a church, there's a gas station. This is the big town hall with the big tree. This one came out just a couple of years ago. It's more of a modern house. We call it the Brady Bunch house. And ironically, my son bought a house similar to it in Denver, in Golden, Colorado. So yeah.
Did you start collecting these?
Well, I liked the first one because it was like a dollhouse. And then they all are sort of like, you know, every other year is more like a little house, and then they'll have a store, and then they might do another house, you know, because...
So you've been collecting them since 1981?
83, yeah. I was married in 81.
Once a year?
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah.
So how many do you have overall?
About 35, I think it is. Yeah. So, yeah, and they did the gazebo, which is kind of interesting. I'm from Westminster, and we, you know, well, most of us small towns have a gazebo in somewhere. So that was kind of neat, yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing your collection with us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Well, this is a collection of antique phonographs, starting from this one is about 1899 and going up to about 1919. We have from 3 different manufacturers represented here. We have Edison and Victor, and then we have Columbia Graphanolas, or gramophones. And they're both the cylinder records and the flat records. The earliest cylinders were made of brown wax, but as you can see, they had a tendency to get moldy in storage, and so these don't play very well anymore. But after that, they started playing.
That's music that can get out of date, right?
Yeah, well, it gets moldy. And then, as time went on, they went to celluloid, which is like a plastic, and they hold up much better.
They're beautiful pieces.
They are, and most of them are portable. You put the cover on and you can take them to go with you.
A boom box.
A little boom box. And in fact, I have an example here. This machine isn't working, but it comes with earphones. So if you have your little earbuds that you could listen to.
I saw someone on the subway with that.
There you go. I could play you a record. You don't get a lot of volume out of that small horn, which is why people would buy bigger horns and bigger horns and bigger horns, and some of them are so big that you have a stand, like a tripod, to actually hold your horn because it would be that big. This is flat records. This is actually the volume control. The horn is in here. And if you don't want it to be as loud, you close the doors. And if you want it louder, you open the doors. So this is...
What year was this in?
This would be probably about 1915 or so.
15 or 15?
15, yeah.
Oh, it's still a crank.
Oh, these are all crank.
Crank up the music,
If McHale sent him to ring the temple bells, and every time he rang the chimes, he'd shudder and he'd win. So he turned the bells in ragtime, they've been that way ever since. Boom, boom, bingity-bing in the morning sun. Boom, boom, bungity-bung when the day is done. Nothing could be sweeter than the syncopated meter of those sweet bells. Boom, boom, bingity-bing when the day is fair. Boom, boom, bungity-bung, all the town is there. Every kinko just as zippy as a coon from Mississippi. Oh, ring them bells, don't you hear them chiming? Lovey-dovey rhyming. Jingle, jangling, tango, tangling, tangling, tangling. Boom, boom, bingity-bing in the morning sun. Boom, boom, bungity-bung when the day is done. Ragtime, 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 temple bells.
So that's it looks like a nail. How come it doesn't like put a hole in these? Or
It's very sharp.
Is it one song per record?
One song per record. That one happened to be Ragtime Temple Bells, if you couldn't understand the singing. It's just a ragtime song from probably 1920-ish.
So we're here with Pete Webster, and Pete, this is a magnificent collection. Harper's Weekly?
Harper's Weekly. Harper's Weekly was printed from 1857 to 1916. It's a vast collection. Thinking that in 1860 it had a circulation of 200,000, which is phenomenal considering it's only been in existence for 3 years and it served a huge part of the country at that time. This was the mainstay for keeping people in the know about, and through the Civil War, the history and the stories are amazing. Even more so behind some of the backstories of the paper itself is the artist, Thomas Nast, who was responsible for drawing a lot of these. In fact, he is responsible for drawing the first Santa Claus as we know it. And this is dated 1865. It's the very first one. He's also responsible for creating the Republican elephant. The Democratic donkey came previous a couple of years. This was in 1874. He's created that also is an original. I've had the collection for about 10 years. I've got it in a very interesting way. I picked it up at a church auction. It was one large big box. And I put a bid in for $20 because I had no idea. I just like old stuff. So when I opened at the top of the box, I said Harper's Weekly, had a few pages, no idea what it was like. So I said, okay, it's worth $20 to me. 10 years later, this is what I have, and more. Maybe the flagship of my whole collection would probably be this Harper's Magazine. That was printed in 1851, a few years prior to this, the Harper's Weekly. This is the predecessor to the Harper's Bazaar, which is still printed today. This is the fourth issue ever printed. This is 1879 Yale versus Princeton football game. Classic. Those last three over there were in 1872, November 10th, Boston almost burned to the ground, or the whole financial district almost burned to the ground. You can see the picture over here, the burned out section of Boston. And it was burned out, burned for about 13 hours. And the reason it burned for that long was because all the horses that were used to pull the water had the flu. No lie, did research on it. They're all pen and ink. That's the amazing part of it. If you can run your hand across here and feel the bumps. That a whole host of engravers. Once the artwork was done, they then engraved it in wood, so it could be then printed, inked, and then run through a printer.
So in a collection that I decided to bring today is kind of the growth or the birth of the watches. European watches came over mostly in the 1800s because we didn't have any watch companies making pocket watches until 1850s. So if you had a pocket watch that you inherited or that you brought over, it would probably look something like this. This one was dated in 1790. That's exactly when George Washington was our president. So anybody walking around with George Washington as the president would have had a pocket watch similar to this. And then they grew into the American-made pocket watches that had sizes like this, a little bit too heavy, and people realized that over the years, that they got too much to weigh them down. So they started making them smaller and smaller, and this is about the smallest men's pocket watches they made, and this is a 12 size.
That's beautiful.
The nice thing about every pocket watch that was American made is they were all well made. There wasn't a bad watch in the lot. There were a couple of inexpensive ones, but ultimately everyone could be fixed and everything could be saved. So it keeps me with a good job security. When people come in with a pocket watch that their grandfather or great-grandfather had, I can always fix it. So it's a lot of fun, and it's great to see the whole collection here on display, along with all of our friends that are bringing theirs. Instead of having it hidden in the closet or the cellar or the attic or a hope chest somewhere, you finally get to have them all out in one place.
You ever bring some pocket watches out with you?
Oh yeah, I usually carry one once in a while, mostly when we're going out for dinner or something like that, because ultimately I'm still kind of spoiled with my wristwatch. But then again, usually when I go out and wear a wristwatch, I wear this one, which is 1902. So when the new ones break down, I go to the original one from 1902, and it never fails. So
were pocket watches a status symbol like many watches are?
They were, because back then people were working for $1 a week, but you see $40 for a brand new pocket watch. You almost have to save up for 2 years, 3 years before you can afford it, because you still got bills to pay. So it was a big thing for somebody to have a pocket watch.
And did most people have a chain and a special pocket in their vest part, or is that just a Hollywood?
Back then everyone wore a suit. They didn't walk around with t-shirts and jeans like we do nowadays. So every suit had the 2 pockets, and then you'd have a chain that would go from one pocket to the other, and you'd always have something weighing it down so it didn't fall out of your pocket. And that way you were dressed appropriately. So the chains were just more or less something to look at.
I think we should bring the pocket watch back in fashion, right?
I'm doing my part.
So I think this is probably the most interesting part of the display that I've done here. And this shows a variety of different materials that pens can be made out of, because pens come in all different materials, all different shapes. So this is a modern pen. It's by a company called Edison, and it's made out of turned resin. So they literally have like a block of acrylic resin, and they put this on a lathe just as if it were a piece of wood, and they go ahead and they carve it out of the resin, and then they'll drill out the center here. And they even have a special device that will cut the grooves for the screw in here. This one is ebonite, which is a type of vulcanized rubber. And it's very lightweight and very durable, and ebonite's becoming more and more popular. This one is worked metal, and it weighs a ton. It's very hefty in the hand, but it's really beautiful in the different layers of metal they have on it.
That is.
And then this one is celluloid, and I just want you to feel that for a second and feel how smooth that feels.
It must be nice to write with, huh?
This is celluloid's a very uncommon material. They used to make pens out of it all the time, but if you remember your movies, celluloid before it actually cured was extremely flammable. And so it was a hard material to work with, but now this is a Japanese company called Platinum, and they've been working with it and making celluloid pens, and they're lovely. This one here is basically powdered paint on steel. So, and it's meant to look like Wedgwood Jasperware because it's by the Wedgwood Company, but it's really just paint on steel. And then this was my gateway drug pen. This is the first pen I ever bought. I bought it in 1995. It's a classic Parker Duofold, and it's an injected resin pen. So all of these show the different ways that they can go ahead and manufacture a pen.
They really are works of art, aren't they?
They are absolutely little works of art and little works of technical precision too. So I took apart an inexpensive pen here for people to take a look at, but when you look at this tiny little nib, and it's got that tiny little line up the front, and you'll realize what a huge feat of engineering it is to get the pen to get a tiny little ink out through this really, really precise little nib. So not only are they beautiful, but they are incredible feats of engineering as well.
So how did you start collecting with this guy here?
I started collecting with that one. It was my heart's desire pen. It was from a company that was going out of sale, and it was half off. And I snapped it up, and then it was just like expensive potato chips. And over time, I began to collect more and more from different companies like Levenger's, always had great deals on pens. But what's wonderful now is that you can get, like, no matter how much you want to spend on a fountain pen, you can get a fountain pen. You can go online, you can get a wonderful little Japanese or Chinese pen. Literally for $3.98, you can get a fountain pen. And it'll write better than any ballpoint you ever had. It'll write better than any roller ball you ever had. And so the world of pens out there is just so diverse and so many different things you can do, and it can meet everybody's budget too. Tilt it back a little more. You want to keep it level? There you go, there you go. Now see how easy that is on your hand?
Oh, I love that.
Bungity-bung when the day is done. Nothing could be sweeter than a syncopated meter of those sweet bells. Bum bum, bingity-bing when the day is fair. Bum bum, bungity-bung, all the town is there. Every kinko just as zippy as a coon from Mississippi. Oh, ring them bells, don't you hear them chiming? Lovey-dovey rhyming. Jingle, jangling, tango, tangling, 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 boom, boom, bingity-bing in the morning sun, boom, boom, bungity-bung when the day is done. Ragtime, 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 temple bells.
This is the Best of the West collection. It's made from Mark's Toys. It has a whole book on what's inside of it. It's basically a Western collection. It's made up of the father, Johnny West, his wife, Jane. They had 4 children, Josie, Jamie, Jay, and Janice. A lot of the horses, everything's plastic, good old plastic. Most of it is to make the horses go anywhere, you would drag them across the floor. Later on, they came out with wheels on the horses, which was great for everything but carpets. Some of the horses are articulated so that you could lift their heads and they move from side to side. Other characters were Sheriff Garrett. There was a whole Indian/Native American collection. So this is Fighting Eagle, Geronimo, Princess Wildflower with her papoose. In the collection there were 2 dogs, Flick and Flack, the other one's on the other side. There's about the American West, so there was a buffalo as well. Roughly 65 to 72 of this collection. They kept on adding to the collection.
How many pieces do you have?
All of them.
Wow, you have a whole collection?
I do.
Good.
This 7993, for example, was registered in 1905 to a gentleman by the name of William Pierce, and that was the first car ever registered in South Africa. Wow. Yeah, so that's pretty cool. So people ask, well, how do you know that's the first car registered? I looked up and researched the first 8,000 registry lines to see that that was the first one registered in South Africa. So this plate was registered to Edwin Howe of Enfield, Mass, and that town is now under an awful lot of water. That's where the Quabbin Reservoir is. So somehow that plate was removed from Enfield, Mass, and it went elsewhere. Then they raised and flooded the town, and the plate survived somehow. So just the time. Yep. So that I was able to look up in that 1910 book and see the documentation of that was registered to.
You know the bottom?
Yep. So the 1911 was registered to Albert Powell, and he lived at 20 Vernon Street in Gardner, and he drove a 22 horsepower Buick. 1912 was registered to Helena A.T. Nickerson, and she lived at, I believe, 58 Grove Ave in Leominster. So Helena and her husband ran and owned Nickerson's Dry Goods, which was in the building where the current Allen's department store is today in Leominster. All right. Now the bottom plate. The 1913, you may not recognize the name, but does Wallace Nutting ring a bell with you by any chance? You ever heard of Wallace Nutting? Okay, so he was a famous New England artist, and he was very prosperous in the 20s and 30s. He did a lot of rural scenes that were hand-colored, and then people bought prints of them to hang in their homes. So Wallace Nutting lived on Vernon Street in Framingham, and this was his plate. So I researched this plate using this 1913 book here to provide the evidence that that was his plate. So the people are gone, sometimes the houses are gone, but the plates remain behind, and sometimes we can unlock those mysteries and show who they were registered to, which is pretty cool to be able to go back 100 plus years and see what it's all about.
When the day is done, nothing could be sweeter than the syncopated meter of those sweet bells. Boom, boom, bingity bing, when the day is fair. Boom, boom, bungity bung, all the town is there. Every chinko just as zippy as a coon from Mississippi. Oh, ring them bells, don't you hear them chiming? Lovey-dovey rhyming. Jingle, jangling, tango, tangling, tangling, tangling. Boom, boom, bingity bing, in the morning sun. Boom, boom, bungity bung, when the day is done. Ragtime, ragtime.